Hi, it's Elisa. I want to talk to you briefly about asynchronous discussions in online courses. I only have a few slides here, but I want to talk about what the research shows in regards to successful asynchronous discussion forums. And then I want to show you some examples of what I've done in my courses to improve these online discussions. So, two components in the literature emerged as being particularly important for a successful asynchronous discussion forum. That would be the role of the instructor and achieving deeper and higher learning. I'm just going to talk about the role of the instructor here. So in this article by Coppola, Hiltz, and Rotter, they did research on faculty and they found that the roles in cognitive, affective, and managerial activities changed in the online environment. So instructing in an online environment is inherently different from the conventional classroom. We all know that. So therefore, we should expect that the roles that we take on as instructors will change to some degree when we deliver an online course and monitor an asynchronous versus a live discussion. So let's take a quick look at these three areas: cognitive, affective, and managerial activities. First, the relationship between the instructor and the learner needed to change because of the loss of face-to-face contact in the conventional classroom. Instructors needed to find new ways to express emotion or passion for the subject matter when communicating ideas to the learners. So affective is just emotional. And we all know that when we're not standing face to face with someone, the way we communicate changes. And that's the same in this role. We can't just take a discussion that we did in a face to face class and say, I'm going to do the same discussion in an online environment. Something has to change. We have to find ways to add back that way of expressing emotion and showing our passion for the subject matter. Okay, so next, our cognitive role changed. So as a result of instructors searching for new modes of communication, instructors found that their teaching involved deeper cognitive complexity. Tone of voice, body language, and spontaneous questions to clarify concepts are all lost in an asynchronous learning environment, necessitating the instructor to become more cognitively involved in the learning materials. So depth of knowledge equals cognitive complexity in this case. So what that means basically is that as an instructor, you have to find other ways to insert that knowledge that you would normally do in a classroom setting. So you can't present material in your online class and not make it so that you have the ability to answer questions on the spot, or not necessarily seconds after it's asked, but in a timely manner. And a lot of that is just the encouragement that we give our students. If a student is talking in your face-to-face class and you have a smile on your face and you're nodding your head in the affirmative, that student is being encouraged to continue on with talking. How do you do that in an online environment? So your cognitive role changes in that respect. And lastly, the managerial role changed through differences in class and course management. Again, because of that loss of expressiveness and spontaneous questions in the face-to-face classroom, instructors need to pay more attention to the details within the course. More precision and formality in setting assignment expectations, for example. Clearly, knowing that successful teaching in an online environment necessarily involves changing your role as an instructor in multiple dimensions is important information. But other research has found specific details of what instructors need to do in order to have that success. You must implement strategies that encourage increased student participation and preparedness. Tips for encouraging participation in threaded discussions are needed. You need to model the tone and frequency of the type of interactions you expect from your students, and integrate due dates that encourage early and frequent participation in the discussion forums. Also, avoid answering all content-related questions before giving students an opportunity to provide feedback. And lastly, encourage content-relevant questions. It always comes down to asking the right questions. Okay, so let me show you some examples of how I've tried to integrate some of this research into my discussion forums in my class. Let's start with the managerial role. So again, when you had a face-to-face class, we never really spent much time discussing with students about how they should participate in in-class discussions. But in the online environment, we need to do that. So I start by creating a very clear guidelines and rubric for my students when they are participating in a discussion. So here you can see that I've pointed out the length and the amount of words for a discussion, how many posts that they should have, but I'm also offering advice about how to receive the grade that they would like to get. So I say that you must post at least 3 times. However, minimum posts earn a minimum grade of a C. So if you're looking for an A, go for a little more substance in your post. Okay, and then I ask for them to read the rubric below. I also set expectations about what needs to happen in the rubric. And one of the things that I need to add to the expectations is that they should not post all of their responses in one setting. They should come back throughout the week to participate in this discussion. So that's one addition I'll add to that. But then I have a rubric that's very clear for students to read and understand and lines up very clearly with the points that they will earn for that discussion. So a discussion that is worth 20 points, I can break it down 5, 10, 12, 15, 17, and 20. So having students read the rubric, really what I'm getting at, and I explain this to students in the very first discussion, that I'm trying to get them to generate a discussion. So if they post something that nobody replies to, there's a reason for that. And I'm trying to get them and encourage them to want people to respond to their posts and to have a discussion around that. So I think a clear rubric will help in managing your discussion forums. So let's take a quick look at a discussion forum in one of my classes. This is a lit class. And let's go back to the strategy that I talked about where you model the tone and frequency of the type of interactions that you expect from your students. So basically this is the very first discussion that these students participated in. So all they have to go on is the rubric and my guidelines that I gave them. But then what I did was very similar to what I'm doing right now with you. I go through the discussion, I make a video like I am doing right now, and I explain to students what things were done well and then what things were not done very well. And I try not to point fingers at anyone so that they become embarrassed. But basically you can see that the student posted, he's making references to pieces of literature that he has read, and then students follow up. So I comment in this area that these students are doing very well because they are clearly addressing the person who made the post. Andy posted, Amber starts out with, Andy, I like the way. Andy, nice post. I think your the idea is ridiculous. And then the same person here. And they wrote a lot more than they were supposed to. I just closed them up so you can see them. So I go through and I demonstrate to students and I model, what they should say. So if someone says something that's not appropriate, I go in and I model what they could have said. So I say, instead of saying this, maybe you could say this instead. So use the first discussion as a teaching mode, and it gives you the chance to show students what it is that you're looking for. So another thing that I implemented this semester is going back to that strategy of encourage content relevant questions. Well, in a lit class, it seems like it's pretty easy to say, let's discuss the book. We're all reading the book. Let's discuss it. And I've learned in the past that that doesn't always generate a good discussion. Also, if I ask one question, it tends to get old very quickly in a class of 24 students. So what I implemented this semester is what I call the EQs, essential questions. And basically, I'm asking for students to come to this page and find an essential question that they can ask in the discussion. So I'm leaving it up to the students to actually ask questions. They can either write their own or they can ask one of the pre-written EQs. And that tends to generate a very exciting discussion with little work on my part. Let's go ahead and look at this Annie on My Mind discussion. It was one of the first books that they read in this Banned Books and Censorship class. And the first student starts out and he asks the question, how does this work reflect a particular culture or cultural values? And then he answers the question right away, which they're supposed to answer after others have, but it didn't stop the discussion from going on. So I came in, gave him a little feedback, excellent question, Sean, and response, and then the students responded to Sean, and then he goes in and answers the question and responds to Sean. And then it continues. Scott comes in and he has something to say about that question as well. So this discussion ended up being a very rewarding discussion, much more valuable than that first discussion that we had because of the back and forth and because the students were asking and answering questions that they wanted to ask and answer and asked a new question. So here's a new question that pops up. So the learning point here was that students needed to wait to answer their question instead of asking the question and then answering right away. So finally, going back to that cognitive role again, I mentioned previously that because we lose out on the tone, body language, and being able to spontaneously answer questions or clarify concepts, we have to find different ways to do that, or we have to be more cognitively involved in the learning materials. Let me show you an example of what I mean by that. So normally in a face-to-face setting, if I were to introduce an assignment similar to this one, students would be able to ask questions and I can respond and I can be very clear about how the students are to do this assignment. But in an online environment, I'm not allowed, or not allowed, it's not easy for me to do that. So basically what I have to do is input where I might find questions that are needed to be answered. So in this case, as I introduce the assignment to students, I clearly give them information and instruction about doing the assignment and why we're doing the assignment. I can even create a video that would help guide them to completing the assignment. Since they're using a web tool, I created a video on how to use that web tool. Then I give them clear step-by-step instructions on what to do, how to prepare, search, bookmark, and how to submit the assignment. I've given them some visuals to clarify some information as well. So here you can see I've just got a document with some images, titles as to what they're supposed to do. And then of course a rubric at the bottom will also help with that too. So I'm more involved in the course materials in an online environment than I would be in a face-to-face environment. Also keep in mind that asynchronous discussion doesn't have to be that formal discussion forums that I started out talking about and what most people think of. Asynchronous discussion just means that you are discussing with your students and your students are discussing with each other. So in this environment that I have in my course, I have permitted students to ask questions. So it's a Q&A forum called Piazza, and students can ask questions, and once their question is answered, all the students can see the response. So here's just an example of a student who asked the question in an earlier post, and I told her to ask the librarian, which is a service that we offer in the district. And she decided that she would come in and share this with the rest of the class. So she tells the other students that she got help from Ask a Librarian, and it was very helpful. So another student came in and responded, "Thanks for the tip." And then, of course, I provided the link. So this is asynchronous discussion as well, just not in that formal sense, but it gives you that ability to ask and answer spontaneous questions. They're not instantly responded to, but they are responded to quickly in this manner. So that's pretty much it for discussion forums, the two components of successful asynchronous discussion, the role of the instructor and achieving deeper higher learning, which I will come back with later and talk about.